Hi, everyone, and welcome. We are joined again today by Larry Johnson, a former CIA intelligence analyst and also a former advisor at the U.S. State Department. So, yeah, welcome back. My listeners
Always,
always happy when
always
you come
honored,
back.
always honored by the invitation, Glenn.
So I sent an email because I read your article on update on Iran's targeting of Israel's defense industry, and
Right.
I thought it was quite interesting to assess the damages which has actually been done, because when Israel and Iran began pounding on each other, we learned a lot, not just about the quality of their weapons, which many were surprised, the capabilities of the Iranians versus what many had thought were much stronger Israeli air defenses. But we also learned a lot about the targets, and I guess
Right.
this is what your articles was to a large extent about. So, what was actually Iran hitting in Israel, and what was it able to destroy?
Yeah. Iran was doing, I'll call it strategic targeting. Um, I don't know if you've ever witnessed a bar fight. Two guys get mad at each other and they start throwing punches wildly and hitting everything. They're not trying to hit something specific. That wasn't what Iran did. Um, Iran was going after trying to shut down the port, because Israel only has two functioning seaports that you get, 40-foot container ship, there's container ships coming in, and they succeeded in doing that, taking out the two oil refineries. Israel only has two, and shutting down the international airport for starters. Um, then the Weizmann Institute, which was this big research center for their nuclear weapons program and other military programs. And then you had a whole host of companies like, Intel, Raytheon, Israeli arms industry, IAI, I think it is. Um, then you had military bases. So uh, Iran was hitting those, and the Israelis imposed great censorship. So the only video footage you got was from um, inhabitants of places like Haifa and Tel Aviv, and some in Beersheba. Beersheba was also hit very, very hard because there were a lot of research facilities there. What's noteworthy is there were not a lot of civilian casualties. I think the total number of Israeli civilians killed was like 29. So I mean, it's with all the with all the missiles that were blowing up here and there, it's remarkable that that number wasn't higher. But part of that was Israel was not targeting. Iran was not targeting Israeli civilian positions, such as, they made a big. They tried to make a big propaganda win on this damage that was suffered by this one hospital. But it turned out that Iran had hit an Israeli intelligence facility that was adjacent to the hospital. The hospital caught the blast wave, the concussive wave. It broke out glass. It injured some people, but it didn't kill anybody. And it certainly was not like the images we've seen coming out of Gaza, where Israel directly and deliberately targets hospitals. So when you step back and realize how small Israel is, landmass, my understanding is, someone looked it up for me, 91 times, Iran is 91 times the size of Israel. So, when Iran takes out one international airport in Israel, they have no other way to get out of the country by air except go to a military airfield. Whereas uh, Iran had, I think it was 29 international airports. So, yeah, uh, Israel could shut down two of them. They still got 27. So it's just that disparity in size meant that Israel was far more vulnerable to these missile attacks, and they're expensive. The other element here was the expense of the defense missiles, the air defense systems, because I think the cheapest one, the most inexpensive, I won't call them cheap, the most inexpensive one was the one, the Arrow 2, Arrow 3. Well, for starters, each one of those costs like let's call it 3 million. It goes between 2.5, 3.5. $3 million a piece. And normally when they are put into use, you fire at least 2, but we did see videos of sometimes as many as 10 were being fired. So right off the bat, you can shoot $30 million up into the sky, and the Iranian offensive ballistic missiles, or cruise missiles, or drones, I think the most expensive one is like $1 million. So, rapidly all of a sudden it becomes an economic problem, or deficit spending. U.S. missiles are even more expensive. The THAAD system, the Theater High Altitude Air Defense System, that goes for $12.9 million. So let's call it $13 million a piece, each missile. And then there's the problem of they don't have unlimited production and unlimited supply. In fact, Israel reportedly only would produce 50 of those Arrow missiles a year. So if if Iran fires 50 ballistic missiles, and that means Israel's going to use up of all 50 of it, then need probably another 50 more. You see, just so rapidly it goes through it. So these were sort of the dynamics undergirding this war that I don't think a lot of people understood.
So when we see we'll look at this war of attrition, we should look at the ability to continue the fighting and absorb the costs. But given that a ceasefire was put in place, but no one really believes that this is gonna last. Instead, there seems to be an effort to, well, both sides to rearm and prepare for possible resumption. But what do we know therefore about the recovery time? Because both Israel and Iran has to recover not just from the damages that were done, but of course also restock on the weaponry. Now, Iran appears to have still a very significant,
Right.
if I'm not mistaken, weapon depot of missiles they can still use against Israel. But how
Yeah.
much time would Israel need to recover from a lot of this? That means replenish the missiles which were used. You mentioned this limited production capability,
Yeah.
but also fix some of the problems, because it needs functioning ports. It needs the oil refineries. It can't. Well, this has to be a priority, I guess.
Yeah, significant damage was done because the censors are keeping such a tight control over the news coming out. Because, if everything was fine and great, they'd be doing advertisements. Hey, come to Israel. It's safe as can be. We're open for business. They're not doing that. Israel faces a bigger challenge with replenishing its air defense system than Iran does, for the simple reason that whether we're talking Iron Dome, Patriot missile, THAAD, the Arrow 2, the Arrow 3, all of those are in very, very limited supplies, number one. There were a lot of those stockpiles had been used up in Ukraine over the last 3 years. So, and then the production level, take a Patriot missile, for example. Lockheed Martin produces 550 of those a year. So, once again, when you got you got 16 of these in a launcher, and they fire out 3 for every incoming missile, you can just do the math. It rapidly erodes that supply. And it's not like they can turn around to Lockheed and say, "Hey, start that engine. Let's start cranking stuff out." It doesn't happen that way. I've been fascinated by this statistic, but it shows how the defense industries have changed, and not changed in a way that's an improvement. Right now, to build an F-35 jet, the 5th generation fighter, it takes 18 to 24 months, so a year and a half to 2 years, just to produce one plane. During World War II, in 1943, the United States started building this B-24 Liberator bomber. They could put it together. They could get it assembled in 63 minutes, and they would have the plane ready to fly in 18 hours. So we've gone from like producing a bomber that was, state-of-the-art bomber in that generation in 18 hours to one now it takes 18, 24 months. So we've raised the sophistication level, at least on the Western side, to such an extent that they have trouble doing mass production. Russia, by contrast, doesn't. And my understanding is Iran is in a similar situation. They're not building these fragile mousetraps that have to take a lot of time to put together. They're actually can get some bulk put out pretty quick. So in terms of the recovery time for air defense systems, I think, again, Iran's in a better position than Israel.
Yeah, I think that was revealed in Ukraine as well, that over the past few decades, the kind of wars we fought, that is, the West fought as, were seen as being less intensity, so focusing
Oh, yeah.
instead on technological superiority. But that was one of the lessons now from Ukraine, that we're not ready for a high-intensity war, the industrial capacity. But this was my impression from Iran as well, by the way, that their envisioned fighting would be, or defense strategy depended, well, not to oversimplify, but just to pump out missiles and drones like a sausage factory, and this will be kind of the heart of their fighting power. And well, it seemed to have worked, but how does this affect, given that the ability to supply Israel obviously also affect our other war, that is the proxy war against Russia? How much from all the weapons that have been sent to Israel and continues to be sent to replenish, how much is this affecting our war capabilities in Ukraine? Because surely, the United States isn't able to send as much weapon as it did before.
Well, you're sending different styles, different types of weapons. So the weapons that are going to Ukraine, Bradley, armored vehicles, tanks, artillery shells, and then the only area where you really get Israel and Ukraine have competition for are Patriot missiles, so air defense systems. Whereas the weapons the United States is sending Israel are bombs that are dropped from planes. So we're not sending any of those to Ukraine because they keep getting shot down. They don't really have that many planes they can put up in the air. Whereas Israel's war is not on the ground. They're not. Yeah, they're taking losses in Gaza, but primarily with respect to Iran, it's an aerial warfare dealing with missiles. And this is where, if you wanted to look at the different strategies for Israel vice Iran, Israel has, it has not been shy about invading its neighbors. And, there was some early on where it was attacked, but it also has been attacking, particularly into Lebanon and Syria. Since the creation of the Islamic Republic in Iran, they haven't launched a single offensive military operation against any of their neighbors. They've had the proxy war supporting the Houthis in their war with Saudi Arabia, but Iran is not set up and structured like the United States has been to send out expeditionary military forces around the world. And so from that standpoint, getting rearmed and re-equipped, it's a bigger challenge for Israel with, getting the bombs out of the United States. They're not going to have, we got plenty of these, conventional bombs that can be dropped. Not a shortage there. But the money that can be allocated for this, Ukraine's taken a back seat. They're now what they call the red-headed stepchild.
It appears the Europeans as well, well, with sending weapons to Israel. But again, as you said, it's their defenses, I think, the main competition. But there is a limitations on funds as well,
Yeah.
especially for the Europeans these days. And well, the Americans are also, uh, having some problems of their own. What I found interesting though is Trump. He initially said that the Israelis were getting pounded hard, and then when the Iranians claimed victory in this war, it seemed to have angered him, and he argued that
Yeah.
this was not real, like this is absurd. He saved Iran by ending the war, that they were not the winner. Israel could have held this out. Now I know Trump says, he talks a lot, and we should assess him about what he does, not what he says. I mean, he's a good salesman. This is what he does, but it does beg the question though about the need for narratives here. Is this
Yes,
seen
very
by
much so.
Trump as being a disaster for Israel, that they have appeared to be weak? Because again, the image of the powerful Israeli army, this is the deterrence there has been very important for Israel. So, what do you see as Trump's ability, I guess, to manage the narratives? Because he says so many things, and a lot of it's contradictory to what he said, 20 minutes ago. So, how is the narrative control there?
You're familiar with the expression "putting lipstick on a pig"?
Yeah,
You know, that's what Donald Trump's doing. When you go, th number one, this operation, decapitation operation, regime change operation that Israel kicked off on June 13th, had been planned for many years. So this wasn't some recent plan that Donald Trump came up with, uh, but he was briefed on it and provided assurances that Israel, hey, we're going to go in there. We're going to take out that top level. We're going to kill all these people. The regime will implode. 24, 36 hours. We should actually be, we'd be in a position to really help bring about get a new government installed. Okay, that was the sales pitch. If you go back and look at the history of how the Stuxnet virus was developed, and there's an excellent documentary out called 0 Days, that sort of those same kind of assurances were made back then. Oh man, all we got to do is we're going to hit those centrifuges in Iran with the Stuxnet, and it's going to shake them, and it's going to destroy Iran's nuclear program. They're going to be out of for years. Yeah, they launched the Stuxnet, destroyed a few centrifuges, and Iran was back up and running, I think, in like 4 weeks or 6 weeks. I mean, it's a very, very short time. That's what happened here. Trump got sold a bill of goods that it was going to be this amazing military victory. And remember, Trump initially, within the first 12 hours, I knew everything. I knew the date, the time. I was really briefed up on it. I knew everything. And then Iran gets back up it got knocked down. It got hit hard, but didn't lay on the floor and curl up in a fetal position. It got up off the floor. I understand, Pepe Escobar said there was, with Russian assistance, they got they defeated the cyber attack that had taken place. They got the air defense system up and working, the computer network up and working, and then they launched their own missile strikes within 12 hours. So all of a sudden, here's Trump watching, whoa, wait a second. And then, they're getting, at least Trump was getting the truth about, Israel's air defense system is not stopping Iran. And so I think as the week, we moved into the second week of the war, and, like day 8, day 9, you realize that Israel was in trouble, because you didn't started getting the newspaper articles, not just, Washington Post is one thing, but when the Wall Street Journal, who's, I don't know of a bigger cheerleader for Israel than the Wall Street Journal, comes out and says, hey, they only got like 2 weeks of air defense missiles, and then they're out. So, um, I don't know how the end was negotiated, but this was clearly, there were elements of negotiation. Did Iran did not quit because the U.S. bombed them. As Trump said, obliterated. I just wiped it out. That's not true. And Iran likewise signaled, hey, we're going to go hit Al Udeid, get all your people out of there. Again, it was a symbolic strike. It wasn't an actual, we're going to go do some damage to you and make you regret you ever did this. This was all about, at this point, this was save Israel. And so Trump created this narrative, and just like he did with the Houthis. Remember when the Houthis capitulated? You remember that, Glenn? The Houthis gave up. Oh, we can't stand it anymore. Stop, Uncle Sam. Oh wait, that didn't. Trump said they capitulated, but Trump retreated and pulled the forces out. That's called a loss. Now, here's, I think, the interesting dynamic this has unleashed is, previously there was this perception that the United States is this pretty powerful military outfit, man. Their aircraft carriers show up in their planes, you just can't stop them. The Houthis stopped them. And then, people with further reflection say, the United States couldn't put the Taliban down after 20 years. And the Taliban didn't have tanks, artillery, armored personnel carriers, fixed-wing fighter jets, rotary-wing aircraft, overhead intelligence circuit. The Taliban basically had sidearms, rifles, some mortars. And they fought the United States to a standstill. And now here's the Houthis stopping it. But there was always that invincible Israeli military, couldn't stop them. And they had this impregnable air defense. Whoops. That part of the narrative's gone now too. So I think, I think they're looking at a changed situation, at least perceptually, in the Middle East.
Yeah, this is the problem of bluffing too much or playing this maximum pressure. Well, if someone calls your bluff, such as Yemen did, it's a very humbling experience for the United States. Once it's the whole world can see it defeated. And again, I remember, well, it's not that long ago, but because the US were losing some flights of some planes, and then suddenly, Trump pulls it back and declares victory. I mean, he can get away with it for some people, but I guess the people who are paying attention, they realize that this was not a victory. But again, you can declare it. But I was wondering though about, because Iran was able to deliver some painful strikes to Israel. By the way, they also hit the Mossad headquarters. There was some.
The IDF headquarters, they hit them all. They hit all the intelligence outlets, and the nuclear facility at Dimona, as well as at least three of the military airfields. So it was comprehensive.
But what do we know about the Israeli targets? Because again, they were able to bring a lot of pain to Iran as well. But as you said, Iran is a much bigger country, both in territory, population. What do we know so far about the damages? Because it looks as if both sides were going after military targets, but also economic targets.
Right. Yeah. Well, it was Israel had some limitations, as did the United States at Bushehr, because at Bushehr you've got 200 Russians working there, and Russia brought in an S-400 and an S-300 air defense system around there and warned Israel and the United States, don't even think about bombing here. And they didn't. That was left completely alone. So it looks like the facilities at Natanz, Isfahan, and Fordo, they were hit. Now, the damage, despite Trump's insistence that it was, quote, obliterated, I have heard from friends who are, let's call it, still have access, that they had already judged before Trump hit those sites that the enriched uranium had been moved to a separate location. So, the intelligence community, that's what they were reporting. The imagery of, the notion that you're going to put two of those GBU 57 bombs, these, and they weigh 30,000 pounds apiece. Normally, the B-2 bomber, if it has a fully fuel tank, can only carry one. But they designed it, they could carry two if the plane, when it takes off, is almost on empty. So it's got enough fuel to fly for 10 minutes. It can lift off the ground, gets up in the air, and then it gets refueled in the air. Because once it's airborne, it's okay. Well, they dropped 12 of those at Fordo. And the problem is, it's not just reinforced concrete below there, it's granite. And granite, engineers will get in an argument over this, but an engineer that I respect said, hey, granite's far more difficult to crack through than the reinforced concrete. And so the odds are that they destroyed the facility. There's 400 meters down, very unlikely. They did a lot of superficial surface damage. They shut down the airport temporarily in Tehran. I think it may still be closed, but Iran's got 28 other airports. So the real damage was the attack on civilians in order to kill certain scientists and kill certain military officials, and they killed their families as well. And then we learned that on top of it, the Israelis were calling people up, and Larajan was this one Iranian official, and said either you join with us in overthrowing the Ayatollah, or we're going to kill you and kill your family. So that kind of thing. So Israel was far more indiscriminate, just as they had been in Gaza. They weren't taking care to avoid civilian casualties.
Yeah. No, well, that became evident with the casualty numbers as well. So where does it go from here? That was kind of my last question, because I was a bit relieved when Trump declared victory, as if he believes he has won, the strikes were successful, he obliterated the nuclear facilities, he got everything he wanted, then you can take your victory lap and go home. But it's becoming more and more clear that this wasn't a victory. We have the director of the IAEA arguing that he wants to know where the enriched uranium of Iran is, and as more and more people begin to see this as an Iranian victory and a loss for Israel, there's I guess an incentive increasingly to have a do-over of this fight. Again, it all depends on when the capabilities can be restored. But do you see all of this pushing to a renewal of the war? I don't know. I spoke earlier to Colonel McGregor, who seemed very convinced that this would be a long war, that this was the opening phase.
Yeah, I don't think this is at an end at all. If I'm Iran, I'm reloading as fast as possible, preparing for the next round. I think there's a strong possibility of a false flag attack in the United States, some sort of terrorist incident to blame on Iran, because that's our narrative, that Iran is the number one sponsor of terrorism in the world, and therefore it's going to attack us. Except, that's just not the history. The history is Iran has not been carrying out offensive terrorist attacks against us. They've, even going back as far as they get blamed for the bombing of the Marine barracks in Lebanon in '83, as well as the U.S. Embassy. Well, what Americans fail to remember is that we started shooting, having our battleships, the New Jersey, fire these gigantic shells into the Bekaa Valley, and we were killing Shia women and children. So there's always been that history. So it wasn't Iran that attacked us on 9/11. But the narrative is being constructed that, oh yeah, Iran's coming after us. We've got all these Iranian sleeper cells here in the country, and they're going to spring into action and they're going to attack. And then that will be used as a justification to go try to attack Iran again. But again, this is where the United States is coming up against the limits of its power, just as Trump discovered with the Houthis. In a period of 7 weeks, the Houthis shot down 7 of those Reaper drones, the MQ-9 Reaper. Well, each one of those cost $35 million apiece. So in 7 weeks, almost $250 million have been shot out of the sky by the Houthis. And then you lose 3 FA-18 Hornets. Those guys went for about 70, 80 million apiece. So, there's another. So already you're up to about $500 million. And then the expenses start piling up without the payoff of saying, yeah, we defeated them. Trump, I don't know if it'll be next week, the week after, but it's going to become clear that the Iran's nuclear facilities were not obliterated. And then Trump's going to have to do one of his classic, like he did with, end that war in 24 hours. And then when they asked him about it, I was just kidding. That was a joke. Oh, okay. Yeah, he can't say I was wrong. Now, I've got my secret fantasy is I hope one of the Iranians is as big of a smart ass as I am, that when the United States talks up and says, hey, where's that enriched uranium? The Iranians will say, oh, well, you obliterated that. You destroyed it all. Who are we to argue with President Trump? Have a nice day. That way. What's really happened here is the United States is now blind with respect to Iran's nuclear program, peaceful or otherwise. Because previously, with the IAEA, there was sharing of information from IAEA officially. But I'd bet dollars to donuts that the United States and or Israel and or France and or MI6 had penetrated IAEA and was using IAEA as an intelligence collection method. That's in fact, go back and look at when Iran first started allowing IAEA inspections, about 2003. That's about the same time the CIA first came up with this estimate that Iran's not working on a nuclear weapon, because I believe they were getting information. Part of the information is coming out of the IAEA. That's why they had a high degree of confidence. Now they don't have that source of information. Now it's stashed away somewhere. So with that kind of uncertainty, that can also lead to greater recklessness on the part of the United States. But I think Iran, now that they've been hit, are going to continue to take precautions to prevent that.
Yeah, the lack of the impact on arms control is going to be one of the disasters.
Yeah.
The idea that they stopped Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. I think the key problem in the years to come is no one will know whether or not Iran is building on the nuclear weapons, because all transparency has been weaponized. But I was just the last question I had was, what is the extent of this actual ceasefire?
I said, first of all, I don't think Iran was actually seriously entertaining shutting down the Straits of Hormuz, because when you looked at it, 80% of the oil out of the Persian Gulf goes to Asia. India, China, between them, they account for like 35% of it, and then the rest goes to Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia. So I didn't see Iran taking any steps to disrupt that traffic, because those are their friends. They're not going to hurt the countries that are already siding with Iran in this battle against Israel. It is possible that they could have done a selective, like the Houthis are in the Red Sea, where you target ships that are headed for Europe or Israel or the United States. And it just that act alone say, okay, we're going to start targeting it, would send insurance rates through the roof, and that would effectively shut down the strait. So I think that was the last ditch measure. It wasn't Iran doesn't view this as a ceasefire. Israel's calling it that, but Iran just said, okay, you stop attacking us. We're not going to attack you anymore. I did have one of the readers at my blog at sonar21.com. He's a convert to Islam, Native American of all things. But he wrote a very, I thought, insightful piece describing this sort of the Islamic theological view that they're not going to do preemptive strikes, for example. And if the enemy stops fighting, you stop fighting. You don't finish them off. So I think there was that element involved as well. But Iran's made it very clear that if you come back and attack us, we will retaliate, and we'll retaliate stronger. They really they didn't start using the really big missiles, the ones you saw when you were in Iran. They didn't really start using those until maybe the last couple of strikes, and they only used a few of them. So they still have, I argue, they still retain a significant capability because, one, they're producing the missiles underground. They're not, it's not an open air factory that the United States can fly over, take pictures with a satellite. And then they store it underground. Well, unless we got a spy, a human being that can walk in there and count and say, yeah, or who's in charge of keeping the inventory, we simply do not know. We're just guessing. So from that standpoint, Iran they have moved to get rid of the IAEA. It's no longer going to be allowed in country, at least as long as Rafael Grossi is in charge of it. They'll have nothing to do with them. They're debating whether or not to pull out of the non-proliferation treaty. If they do that, I take that as a sign that they're going to build a nuke. But they're not going to cooperate with the West like they were, because they've been burned. They were betrayed. It was, they got sucker punched, and I think they've learned their lesson.
I think the offering to stop attacking Israel when Israel attacked them, I think it was clever to have that off-ramp for Israel, because the idea of finishing off Israel, like making Israel too desperate, it's not a great idea when you have a weakened country with nuclear weapons facing an existential threat. So it's probably wise. But I noticed something interesting as well when I talked to some Iranians, which was the idea that Iran has never had this much sympathy around the world, and this goodwill is something they didn't want to throw away, to the extent that this could have influenced also their targeting of Israel, and also the preparedness to end the conflict when the opportunity came. And I thought this was interesting, because the efforts to isolate Iran, efforts to isolate Russia for that sake, is often seen as an objective. But if you look at the restraints of, for example, Russia in Ukraine, they don't really give a damn anymore about what the West thinks of them, but they do care a lot about what China, Iran, and India thinks of them. So that's the restraining factor. But it's the same with Iran to a large extent. They know that there's a lot of goodwill, so it's not, they don't care that much what the Americans or the Europeans think of them. They know what they think of them, but it's the rest of the world which has more sympathy, and they didn't want to spend all of this goodwill. So I guess for Washington, ironically, they should be happy that Iran is not isolated, because this is what restrains them, not the threat of bombing them or the West thinking badly of them.
True. It is one of my readers, pretty clever fellow, described it as, this is the Samson option versus the Samsonite option. And I went, okay, explain that. Well, the Samson option is Israel, they're facing getting wiped out. They're going to use a nuke. It's, they're going to blow the world up with themselves. The Samsonite option, what he claims is Iran's pursuing, is to inflict enough damage on Israel that it becomes an impossible place to live, so the inhabitants all pack up their Samsonite suitcases, get on a plane, and leave.
That appears to be happening to some extent. A
Yeah,
lot of people
yeah.
are leaving, and this adds to the economic troubles, I guess. So it could be they could be making Israel an unsustainable entity if they continue along this path.
Well, yeah, Israel was, it suffered major, 21 months of loss on the tourist industry. Tourist industry was a substantial portion of their economy. But now, some of the factories, the places that actually produce goods for Israel, including their arms industry, Iran hit those and damaged them. We're not given the damage assessment. All I can go on is what the news broadcasters at Israeli Channel 13 were saying was, yeah, the government's covering. We've really got hammered, and the government's covering it up. So I think Israel's economy is probably in bigger trouble now than it's ever been.
Well, hopefully that will restrain some of the willingness to continue this war, though, or at least be a factor to advocating for peace. So
Right.
but no, thank you so much for letting me pick your brain. I really wanted to, like I said, speak with you after I read that article. So thanks again. And for anyone listening, I'll put the link to the article in the description. So make sure to visit the website and read the article. So thank you again.
Hey, Glenn, thank you, and have a good trip. Say hi to Jeff.
Oh, will do.
Bye-bye.